So the market's very jittery. How often are you thinking about the prospect of a recession? Do you see a significant chance of one?
I think it's certainly on the table. I think it's very early to make a judgment about whether or not we have a recession or we actually have a huge rebound. And I think that over the coming days and months, we'll get increasing clarity. I think if we get through this period and we get to a new equilibrium in terms of trade and business arrangements, no, I don't think we'll have a recession. I think if that takes a while, I think the risk is higher. But right now, I think it's on the table, but no one can tell you one way or another whether that's a high likelihood.
How long is a while? How long can the markets live through this kind of uncertainty, public or private?
I don't think it's a question of how long can the markets live. I think it's a question of business owners and their ability to plan going forward. So you hear this now when CEOs come out and they're doing quarterly reporting, they're saying, hey, very difficult to forecast. Difficult to forecast is troubling because it stalls decision making and it chills activity. And then you get people doing more contingency planning than growth planning. And so, but that could pivot quite quickly if we got to a point of clarity, but sooner is better than later.
When I last interviewed you about this, you told investors to buckle up.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that way?
I think they should still stay buckled. It's just a question of whether or not the airbags come out now. But I think that, yeah, I think this is an environment where if you have a lot of tolerance for volatility, then you can lean in. I think if your tolerance for volatility is low, then you should be protecting capital.
So Fed Chair Powell has said that he is concerned about the prospect of persistent inflation. Now, because of that, you have a market that is increasingly concerned about stagflation. Is that a scenario you're concerned about?
I don't think there's a scenario I'm concerned about. I think the Fed chair has done an amazing job in his role, whether it was navigating the pandemic, navigating the spike in inflation. I think we see the stickiness of inflation in our portfolio companies, as we talked about earlier around the KPIs. We can see the fact that there's not marginal demand destruction, which actually would drive prices lower. So inflation does feel sticky, but inflation being sticky in and of itself is not a bad factor. That's actually a reflection of a strong economy, low unemployment. I think the concern people have now is that business activity slows, but because of the policy decisions, this is a period where prices are elevated, and you end up in that part of the Venn diagram for a period of time where you do have elevated prices and a slowing economy. And I think, but sticky inflation at the rates we're at now, I don't actually think in and of itself independently is a concern. It's a question of whether or not we do get a slowdown in business activity and inflation remains sticky, and then yeah, that is a concern.
So when is it that you think the Fed can start cutting rates again?
Well, that's a decision the Fed will make, but I think what the Fed has shown us is in periods of uncertainty, and this is a period of uncertainty because we're in a new policy regime geopolitically, is that in uncertainty, I think they do the right thing. They track the data. And so the good news is they have a lot of financial flexibility here at this level. So they can easily cut rates. What they don't want to do is cut rates unnecessarily and then be behind the curve and have to come back up. And so I think what they've communicated to the marketplace is we're going to watch the data very, very carefully. If the data indicates to us that unemployment is rising or inflation gives us a little more slack, then they're going to cut rates. But I think they're doing a wise thing right now because uncertainty is high and this is a new regime. And so I think, again, I'm super complimentary of their actions.
So what is it, if anything, that keeps you up at night right now?
If you think longer term, I think the most important thing that's really in front of the markets right now is if we end up in a sustained trade war between the United States and China. I don't think it's a good outcome if the number 1 and 2 largest economies in the world haven't found an equilibrium around cooperation. I wouldn't say it keeps me up at night, but I think if you think about the information we're all seeing in the marketplace, it's really critical for the global economy and for trade that we and China find a place of cooperation at an equilibrium. And I think the faster that can happen, the better it is for all business activity globally, especially in the United States.